Be me, Jessica, 28, work as a marketing coordinator. Been with Michael for 2 years and honestly getting fed up with his typical male behavior. He's always trying to explain things to me like I'm some helpless woman who doesn't understand basic concepts. Constantly displaying his fragile masculinity whenever I point out problematic aspects of society. Decided we need couples therapy because this relationship is becoming unbearable due to his toxic patterns. Michael agrees to therapy immediately, which is honestly suspicious. Probably thinks some male therapist will take his side and validate his patriarchal worldview. Do my research and find Dr. Sarah Martinez, a female therapist with excellent credentials. Perfect. Finally someone who will see through Michael's manipulation tactics. Walking into the therapy office, feeling confident. Been mentally preparing for weeks about all the ways Michael exhibits toxic masculinity, ready to have a professional validate what I've been saying all along. Michael sits down looking nervous, which just proves he knows he's been problematic. Dr. Martinez asks us to each describe why we're here. I launch into a detailed explanation about how Michael consistently displays controlling behavior through mansplaining. Explain how he dismisses my experiences as a woman in a male-dominated workplace. Describe his fragile ego and inability to handle being called out on problematic statements. Mention how he gets defensive whenever I educate him about systemic oppression. Michael just sits there quietly, which is typical. When Dr. Martinez asks him to respond, he says, "I just want us to communicate better and understand each other." Classic deflection tactic, making it sound like a mutual problem when clearly he's the issue. Dr. Martinez starts asking specific questions about our daily interactions. Asks me to describe a recent argument, tell her about last week when Michael mansplained the new software update at work. He had the audacity to walk me through features I already knew about. When I called him out for mansplaining, he claimed he was just trying to be helpful. Textbook gaslighting behavior. Dr. Martinez asks Michael about this incident. He explains that I had mentioned being frustrated with the new system at work. Says he had used similar software at his previous job and thought he could share some shortcuts. Claims he asked if I wanted help before explaining anything. Obviously trying to rewrite history to make himself look better, feeling increasingly frustrated that Dr. Martinez isn't immediately seeing through his manipulation. She asks for more examples, so I provide several. The time he corrected my pronunciation of a word during dinner with friends. When he suggested a different route to avoid traffic without asking for my input first. How he always assumes I need help carrying groceries. Notice Dr. Martinez taking detailed notes, probably documenting all of Michael's problematic behaviors. Feeling validated that a professional is finally witnessing what I deal with daily. Dr. Martinez asks about our communication patterns. Explain how Michael shuts down whenever I try to educate him about social justice issues. Describe his passive-aggressive behavior when I point out problematic language. Mention how he weaponizes his emotions to avoid accountability. Tell her about his pattern of tone policing my rightful anger. She asks Michael about his perspective on these conversations. He says he feels like he can't say anything right and walks on eggshells constantly. Claims he's afraid to express opinions because I'll find something problematic about them. Says he feels criticized for basic human interactions. Typical victim-playing behavior from someone who can't handle being held accountable. Dr. Martinez asks me how I respond when Michael expresses concerns about our communication. Explain that I validate his feelings while also helping him understand why his behavior is harmful. Mention that I encourage him to examine his internalized biases rather than getting defensive. Describe how I create safe spaces for him to learn and grow. She asks for specific examples of how I validate his feelings. Realize this is probably a test to see if I actually do support him emotionally. Tell her about the time he was upset about work stress, and I reminded him that stress affects everyone differently, based on privilege. Mention how I helped him understand that his frustration might be misplaced, aggression from patriarchal conditioning. Explain that I encouraged him to examine why he felt entitled to express anger so freely. Notice Michael looking uncomfortable during my explanation, probably embarrassed that his problematic responses are being exposed to a professional. Dr. Martinez asks him how those conversations made him feel. He says, unheard, and like my emotions don't matter unless they fit into a specific framework. Classic example of male fragility when faced with constructive criticism. Dr. Martinez starts asking about specific incidents in more detail. Wants to know about the software mansplaining situation. Michael explains that he noticed I was stressed about work and asked if I wanted help with anything. Claims I said the new system was driving me crazy, and I didn't understand why they changed everything. Says he offered to show me some features that might help, and I agreed. Obviously, he's twisting the story to make his mansplaining seem solicited. Interrupt to clarify that just because someone expresses frustration doesn't mean they want a man to swoop in and fix things. Explain that women are capable of solving problems without male intervention. Point out that his assumption that I needed help is rooted in patriarchal conditioning. Dr. Martinez asks if I remember agreeing to let him show me the software features. Honestly, can't recall the exact conversation, but the point is broader than one specific interaction. Explain. That internalized misogyny might have made me think I needed his help in that moment. Tell her that the larger pattern matters more than individual incidents. She asks Michael how he felt when I called him out for mansplaining. He says, confused and hurt, because he thought he was helping with something I had asked for. Claims he immediately apologized and tried to understand what he did wrong. Says I told him that intent doesn't matter, and impact is everything. Mentions that I explained how his behavior perpetuates harmful stereotypes about women's competence. Dr. Martinez asks how that conversation ended. Michael says he thanked me for educating him and promised to be more aware in the future. Says he felt bad about making me feel dismissed, even though it wasn't intentional. Typical performative allyship, saying what he thinks I want to hear. She turns back to me and asks how I felt about his response. Explain that while his words seemed appropriate, his body language showed resistance. Mention that true accountability requires examining unconscious biases, not just surface-level apologies. Describe how I could sense his resentment despite his seemingly apologetic words. Dr. Martinez asks what specific body language indicated resistance. Honestly struggling to remember exact details, but know I felt his energy was off. Explain that women develop heightened sensitivity to male emotional manipulation as a survival mechanism. Mention that his crossed arms and lack of eye contact revealed his true feelings. She asks Michael about his body language during that conversation. He says he was processing what I said and trying to understand where he went wrong. Claims he was looking down because he felt ashamed of hurting my feelings. Says his arms were crossed because we were standing in the kitchen and he was cold. Obvious gaslighting attempt to make me question my perceptions. Dr. Martinez starts asking about other relationship dynamics. Wants to know about household responsibilities and decision-making. Explain that I've had to constantly advocate for equitable distribution of labor. Describe how Michael initially fell into typical male patterns of assuming I'd handle emotional labor. Mention my ongoing efforts to educate him about invisible work that women do. She asks for specific examples of household inequity. Tell her about how I had to create a chore chart because Michael wasn't naturally seeing what needed to be done. Explain that I manage our social calendar and gift giving because he lacks emotional intelligence in those areas. Mention how I handle most communication with both our families because women are typically better at maintaining relationships. Dr. Martinez asks Michael about household responsibilities. He says we split chores pretty evenly, but acknowledges that I'm better at remembering social obligations. Claims he offered to take over family communication, but I said I preferred handling it myself. Mentions that he does most of the cooking and grocery shopping because he enjoys it. Says we both work full-time and try to divide tasks based on preferences and schedules, feeling frustrated that he's making it sound like everything is perfectly balanced. Interrupt to explain that his preferences are probably shaped by societal conditioning. Point out that just because someone enjoys cooking doesn't mean they should be exempt from other emotional labor. Mention that my preference for handling family communication is really about competence, not choice. Dr. Martinez asks about our social life and friend groups. Explain that I've been helping Michael recognize problematic behavior in his friend group. Describe how I've educated him about casual sexism in their conversations. Mention my efforts to introduce him to more progressive social circles. She asks for specific examples of problematic behavior from his friends. Tell her about the time his friend Jake made a comment about women being bad drivers. Mention how they often make jokes that perpetuate harmful stereotypes. Describe the microaggressions I witness when we hang out with his college buddies. Dr. Martinez asks how I addressed these situations. Explain that I call out problematic comments in the moment rather than staying silent. Describe how I educate Michael's friends about the impact of their language. Mention that I've encouraged Michael to have private conversations with them about growth and accountability. She asks Michael how he feels about my interactions with his friends. He says he appreciates that I want people to be more thoughtful about their language. Mentions that some friends have told him they feel uncomfortable around me now. Claims they think I'm looking for problems in everything they say. Says some have stopped inviting us to gatherings because they feel judged. Typical male solidarity, prioritizing his friendships over social justice. Explain to Dr. Martinez that this is exactly the kind of resistance that perpetuates harmful systems. Point out that his friends' discomfort proves they know their behavior is wrong. Mention that true allies should be willing to sacrifice toxic relationships for growth. Dr. Martinez asks if I've considered that different communication styles might be more effective. Honestly shocked that a female therapist would suggest I tone down my advocacy. Explain that women have been silenced for centuries and I refuse to make others comfortable at my own expense. Mention that gentle education often gets ignored while direct confrontation creates actual change. She asks about our intimate relationship and emotional connection. Explain that physical intimacy requires emotional safety, which is difficult when dealing with internalized misogyny. Describe how Michael's unconscious biases create barriers to genuine vulnerability. Mention that I need to feel heard and validated before I can be fully present. Dr. Martinez asks Michael about his experience with emotional intimacy in our relationship. He's quiet for a long moment, which is telling. Finally says he feels like he's constantly being evaluated instead of just being loved. Claims he's afraid to be spontaneous or natural because everything gets analyzed through a political lens. Says he feels more like a student than a partner sometimes. Obvious deflection from the real issues we're discussing. Explain to Dr. Martinez that his discomfort with being evaluated shows resistance to growth. Point out that all relationships require ongoing assessment and improvement. Mention that his desire to be natural probably means reverting to problematic default behaviors. Dr. Martinez has been taking notes throughout our session. Now she's looking back through them with a serious expression. Honestly feeling excited that we're finally getting to the part where she validates my concerns. Ready to hear her professional assessment of Michael's toxic patterns. She starts by saying that she's observed some concerning dynamics in our relationship. Exactly what I expected to hear. Explains that these patterns are preventing us from having healthy communication and emotional connection. Mentions that one partner seems to be constantly criticized while the other maintains a position of moral superiority. Wait, something feels off about how she's framing this. She continues explaining that she's seeing vigilance for problems rather than appreciation for positive efforts. Mentions weaponizing social justice language to shut down communication. Describes emotional manipulation disguised as education, starting to feel uncomfortable because this doesn't sound like the validation I expected. Dr. Martinez is looking directly at me while describing these patterns. Surely she's about to explain how Michael exhibits these behaviors. She says, "Jessica, I want you to listen carefully to what I'm about to share." Feeling confident because obviously Michael needs to hear some hard truths. Ready for her to break down all his problematic behaviors with professional insight. Based on our conversation today, I'm seeing that you consistently interpret Michael's actions through a lens of suspicion and criticism. What the hell is she talking about? When he offered help with software, you framed it as mansplaining rather than considering he was responding to your expressed frustration. This is completely wrong. She's missing the bigger picture. You described educating his friends about their language, but from what you've shared, it sounds like you're creating hostile social situations. Cannot believe a female therapist is taking this position. Your response to Michael's emotions seems to involve analyzing them rather than simply acknowledging them. She's completely misunderstanding the dynamic here. Dr. Martinez continues, "Michael, how often do you feel like Jessica appreciates things you do well?" He thinks for a moment and says, "Honestly, not very often. I feel like I'm always doing something wrong." When was the last time she complimented you or expressed gratitude without also providing correction? He's quiet for a long time and finally says, "I can't remember. This is completely unfair. They're ganging up on me now." Interrupt to explain that constant praise isn't realistic when someone needs to unlearn harmful patterns. Mention that growth requires discomfort, and Michael can't expect validation while still exhibiting problematic behaviors. Dr. Martinez asks, "Jessica, when was the last time you told Michael something you appreciated about him?" Honestly struggling to think of recent examples because he's been particularly difficult lately. Explain that I appreciate his willingness to learn, even though he has a long way to go. Mention that I value his efforts to become more aware, despite his frequent backsliding. But when did you last express appreciation for who he is, not just his efforts to change? This question doesn't make sense because change is the whole point. Explain that accepting someone as they are means enabling harmful behaviors. Point out that unconditional love doesn't mean unconditional acceptance of problematic patterns. Dr. Martinez turns to Michael. "How does it feel to hear that Jessica's love seems conditional on your ability to change?" He looks genuinely hurt and says, "Like I'm not good enough as I am." Says, "Like I'm always being tested instead of just being loved." Mentions that he feels like he can't relax or be himself. This is completely twisting everything around. Explain that love naturally involves wanting your partner to be their best self. Point out that being himself might mean reverting to unconsciously harmful behaviors. Mention that my standards aren't unreasonable, they're just higher than what he's used to. Jessica, I want to walk through some specific examples with you. Dr. Martinez pulls out her notes from our session. You mentioned that Michael corrected your pronunciation at dinner with friends. When I asked for details, you said he gently suggested an alternative pronunciation of a word you'd mispronounced. Is it possible that he was trying to help you avoid embarrassment rather than trying to control you? Absolutely not accepting this reframing. Explain that public correction is a classic dominance behavior regardless of intent. Point out that the impact matters more than his supposed helpful intentions. Mention that women shouldn't have to accept male guidance about their own language. But Jessica, you also mentioned that you educate his friends about their problematic language. How's that different from what you're describing as Michael's controlling behavior? This comparison is completely inappropriate and shows she doesn't understand power dynamics. Explain that I'm speaking truth to power while Michael was reinforcing existing hierarchies. Point out the fundamental difference between punching up and punching down. Dr. Martinez continues reviewing her notes. You said Michael assumes you need help with groceries. But you also mentioned that you've created systems for household management because he doesn't naturally see what needs to be done. Do you see how both of these could be interpreted as one partner trying to be helpful? Getting increasingly frustrated with these false equivalencies. Explain that there's a difference between creating equitable systems and making assumptions about capability. Point out that I'm organizing our lives while he's just imposing his solutions on me. Mention that context and historical power imbalances matter. Jessica, I'm going to share an observation that might be difficult to hear. Here we go, finally getting to the real issues. Throughout our session, you've consistently reframed Michael's actions in the most negative possible light. This is not what I expected her to say. You've described his attempts to help as controlling, his emotions as manipulation, and his social discomfort as resistance. Meanwhile, you've described your own similar behaviors, correcting, managing, organizing his social interactions as education and advocacy. She's completely missing the nuance of these situations. What I'm seeing is a pattern where you maintain moral authority by constantly finding fault with Michael's behavior. Cannot believe this is happening. Explain that there's a fundamental difference between advocating for justice and perpetuating oppression. Point out that my criticism is actually accountability. Mention that someone has to address these issues or nothing will change. Jessica, how does Michael typically respond when you point out his problematic behavior? He usually apologizes and tries to do better, which should prove I'm right. And how do you respond when he points out something you've done that hurt his feelings? Honestly, can't think of many examples because he rarely has legitimate complaints about my behavior. Dr. Martinez asks Michael directly, do you feel comfortable expressing when Jessica hurts your feelings? He's quiet for a long time and finally says, not really, because she usually explains why my feelings are wrong or problematic. It says, I've learned it's easier to just apologize and try to do better. Claims he feels like his emotional experiences don't matter unless they fit into her framework. This is exactly the kind of victim mentality that prevents growth. Explain that feelings aren't always valid if they're based on entitlement or unconscious bias. Point out that I help him examine the root causes of his emotions, rather than just validating them blindly. Mention that this is actually more loving than shallow emotional support. Jessica, do you hear what you just said? Dr. Martinez looks genuinely concerned now. You just told me that Michael's feelings aren't valid if they don't align with your worldview. You're describing emotional invalidation as love. She's completely mischaracterizing what I said. Explain that I didn't say his feelings aren't valid, just that they need to be examined for problematic origins. Point out that true emotional intelligence involves understanding why we feel things. Mention that surface-level validation can actually be harmful if it reinforces negative patterns. Let me ask you something directly, Jessica. When was the last time you considered that you might be wrong about something in your relationship? This question is absurd because I've spent years studying these dynamics. Explain that while I'm always open to growth, the fundamental issues we're discussing are well-documented patterns. Point out that questioning my analysis is exactly the kind of gaslighting that silences women's experiences. And when was the last time you apologized to Michael for something? Honestly, can't remember specific instances because I'm usually more self-aware than he is. Mention that I acknowledge when I could have communicated more effectively. Explain that true accountability involves systemic change, not just individual apologies. Dr. Martinez turns to Michael again. How often does Jessica apologize when she hurts your feelings? He thinks for a moment and says, she doesn't really apologize. She explains why what she did was necessary or how I misunderstood. Says, Sometimes she acknowledges that her delivery could have been better, but never that her actual response was wrong. This is completely unfair because my responses are usually justified. Explain that empty apologies without understanding perpetuate harmful cycles. Point out that I take responsibility when I'm actually wrong, not just when his feelings get hurt. Mention that men often expect apologies for being held accountable. Jessica, I want you to really listen to what I'm about to say. Dr. Martinez has this serious expression that's making me nervous. What you're describing is a relationship where you have all the moral authority. You determine what behaviors are acceptable, you decide when feelings are valid, you control the framework for all interactions. She's completely misrepresenting the dynamic. You've created a situation where Michael cannot express himself authentically without risking criticism. He's walking on eggshells, afraid to have natural emotional responses because you'll analyze them as problematic. This is not a partnership. This is you being the judge of someone you claim to love. Feeling genuinely shocked that a female therapist is taking this position. Explain that maintaining standards isn't the same as being controlling. Point out that someone has to address problematic patterns, or they'll never change. Mention that I'm fighting against harmful systems, not trying to control Michael personally. But Jessica, you are trying to control Michael personally. You've admitted to managing his social interactions, correcting his language, analyzing his emotions, and determining the validity of his feelings. You've described creating systems to manage his behavior and educating him constantly. How is that different from emotional abuse? Absolutely cannot believe she just used those words. Explain that abuse involves harming someone, not helping them grow. Point out that I'm trying to create a more equitable relationship. Mention that comparing advocacy to abuse shows a fundamental misunderstanding of power dynamics. Jessica, emotional abuse often involves one partner believing they know what's best for the other. It includes constant criticism disguised as helping, invalidating the other person's emotions and maintaining control through moral superiority. The abuser often genuinely believes they're helping their partner become a better person. This is completely inappropriate and offensive, starting to feel like this therapist has some serious biases of her own. Explain that comparing feminist advocacy to abuse is exactly the kind of rhetoric used to silence women. Point out that she's perpetuating harmful stereotypes about women being too demanding. Dr. Martinez continues, Michael, do you feel like you can be yourself in this relationship? He shakes his head and says, I feel like I'm constantly performing to avoid criticism. Says, I second guess everything I say because Jessica will find something problematic about it. Mentions that he's lost confidence in his own perceptions and feelings. Do you feel loved for who you are? Michael is quiet for a long time and finally says, I feel like Jessica loves who she wants me to become, not who I actually am. Says, I feel like I'm always failing some test I didn't know I was taking. Mentions that he's started avoiding social situations because he's embarrassed about how Jessica treats our friends. Cannot believe he's painting me as the villain here. Explain that I love him enough to help him become his best self. Point out that growth requires discomfort and he can't expect to stay in his comfort zone forever. Mention that our friends need to be challenged on their problematic behaviors whether he likes it or not. Jessica, do you hear yourself right now? Dr. Martinez looks genuinely concerned. You just said you love who Michael could become, not who he is. You're more concerned about educating your friends than about Michael's emotional well-being. You're prioritizing your social justice agenda over your relationship. This is completely unfair because social justice shouldn't be separate from relationships. Explain that personal relationships are political and ignoring that is privileged. Point out that I can't separate my values from my love life. Mention that true love involves challenging each other to grow. But Jessica, you're only challenging Michael to change. You're not open to changing yourself. You've created a dynamic where you're always right and he's always wrong. That's not growth, that's domination. Feeling genuinely attacked by this whole conversation. Starting to wonder if Dr. Martinez has internalized misogyny herself. Explain that I'm constantly examining my own behavior and working on personal growth. Point out that the issues we're discussing are about systemic patterns, not personal flaws. When did you last admit you were wrong about something significant in your relationship? Honestly struggling to think of examples because I'm usually more informed about these dynamics. Explain that I acknowledge when my communication could be more effective. Mention that I'm always learning and growing, just not about the fundamental issues we've been discussing. Jessica, I need to be direct with you. Dr. Martinez puts down her notes and looks at me seriously. Based on what I've observed today, you are exhibiting emotionally abusive behaviors toward Michael. You control his social interactions, invalidate his emotions, maintain moral superiority, and resist any accountability for your actions. Feeling like the room is spinning, this cannot be what's happening right now. Explain that she's completely misunderstanding the situation. Point out that abuse involves intention to harm, not efforts to create positive change. Jessica, impact matters more than intent? Isn't that what you told Michael? Cannot believe she's using my own words against me. You've created a relationship where Michael cannot express himself without fear of judgment. You've isolated him from friends who don't meet your standards. You've convinced him that his natural emotional responses are problematic. This is textbook emotional manipulation, starting to feel genuinely panicked because this is not how this was supposed to go. Explain that I came here for help with Michael's toxic behaviors. Point out that I've been trying to create a healthier relationship dynamic. Mention that everything I've done has been motivated by love and desire for growth. But Jessica, healthy relationships involve mutual respect and acceptance. You don't respect Michael's autonomy or accept him as he is. You've appointed yourself as his teacher, judge, and moral superior. That's not love, that's control. Michael is sitting there looking at me with this expression I can't read, feeling like everything I believed about our relationship is being turned upside down. Explain that I never intended to make him feel controlled. Point out that I was just trying to address legitimate problems in our dynamic. The intention doesn't matter, Jessica, remember? Dr. Martinez is using all my own arguments against me. Michael has clearly communicated that your behavior is harmful to him. Instead of listening and adjusting, you've explained why his feelings are wrong. That's exactly the invalidation you accused him of. Sitting here trying to process what's happening, came into this session completely confident that Michael was the problem, ready to have a professional validate everything I've been saying about his toxic patterns. Instead, she's telling me that I'm the one exhibiting abusive behaviors. Looking at Michael and seeing genuine pain in his eyes, realizing that he's been sitting quietly this whole time, not defending himself or attacking me back, remembering how he always apologizes immediately when I point out problems, thinking about how he asks permission for things that should be normal relationship decisions. Dr. Martinez asks, Jessica, how are you feeling right now? Honestly don't know how to answer because my entire worldview is crumbling. Always prided myself on being self-aware and committed to justice. But she's showing me patterns I never recognized in my own behavior. Say, I feel confused and attacked. She asks, do you think that's how Michael feels most of the time in your relationship? The parallel hits me like a physical blow, realizing that I've been doing to him exactly what I accused him of doing to me. Starting to understand that I've been so focused on systemic oppression that I missed my own oppressive behaviors. Always saw myself as the victim of patriarchal conditioning, never as someone who could perpetuate harmful dynamics. Convinced myself that my criticism was constructive because it was politically motivated, never considered that I could be wrong about our relationship problems. Looking at Michael again and seeing 2 years of walking on eggshells. Remembering all the times he tried to express concerns and I shut him down with social justice language. Realizing that I've been using feminism as a weapon instead of a tool for actual equality. Understanding that I've created exactly the kind of controlling dynamic I claim to oppose. Dr. Martinez explains that we have a lot of work to do if we want to save this relationship. Says that I need to take genuine accountability for my behaviors and their impact on Michael. Mentions that I'll need to examine my own need for control and superiority. Points out that real love involves accepting people as they are while encouraging growth, not demanding change. Sitting here in complete shock because everything I believed about myself and our relationship was wrong. Came in here convinced that Michael was exhibiting toxic masculinity, leaving with the realization that I've been exhibiting toxic behaviors while hiding behind progressive politics. Understanding that I've been the insufferable, controlling partner I always accused him of being. Michael reaches over and takes my hand gently, says, I still love you, Jessica. I just want us to be equals. Realizing that despite everything I've put him through, he's still here trying to make things work. Understanding that his patience and kindness have been real this whole time while I questioned his every motive. Dr. Martinez schedules our next appointment and says this is just the beginning of our work. Walking out of that office feeling completely shattered but also strangely hopeful. Knowing that I have a lot of apologizing and changing to do. Realizing that true growth means admitting when you're wrong, not just demanding it from others. Spent 2 years convinced I was fighting oppression in my relationship. Turns out I was the one doing the oppressing. Horror and shock don't even begin to describe how it feels to realize you've become everything you claim to stand against.